Hello. Hey guys, how are you? Are you guys excited to be here? All right. Welcome also to our live stream audience. We are live streaming this event, so that's pretty cool. There are game enthusiasts all over the country who are tuning in to hear Ryan speak, and we're really, really excited about that. My name's Taylor. I'm with the School of Cinema and Media Arts here at Biola University. We're especially excited about today's event because it marks the first ever video game event since launching our game design program this fall. So we're pretty excited about that. And we're so excited about what's happening here at the School of Cinema and Media Arts with our game design program. We, just this summer, got an $800,000 grant. And with that, we are putting together a brand new game design lab that is going to be launching next academic year that we're really, really excited about. In addition to that, there's some other big news that we're going to be announcing in the upcoming weeks. And so we encourage you, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram as we tease that announcement a little bit. But there's going to be a big announcement coming up soon about our game design program that we're really excited about. Encourage all of you watching at home to visit us at biola.edu/film. You can find out all about our game design program, the classes you'll be taking, the resources that we can offer you. We'd love for you to apply. December 1st, application deadline. We also have a February 1st extended application deadline. So go ahead, log on to biola.edu/film, check out the application, the program there. So today we will be hearing from our guest, Ryan Green. We'll also have time for Q&A afterwards, led by our game design professor, Michael Steffen. You can send in your questions for that. There'll be a number here on the screen at the end of Ryan's talk where you can text your questions in. And if you're watching on the live stream, go ahead and send a comment on the live stream, any questions that you want Ryan to answer, and we'll send them up the stage to him. So Ryan, our today's guest, why I'm so excited that we were able to bring Ryan here is because I believe he embodies the mission of the School of Cinema and Media Arts, and that's to tell stories that matter. And Ryan's done this in his career, and he's done this with the video games that he's created. Ryan Green's an award-winning indie game developer and freelance application developer with 14 years of professional experience. His awards include the Emotional Game Awards of 2016, the Independent Games Festival Awards, Games for Change Awards, the Game Awards 2016, National Academy of Video Game Trade Reviewers, the 2017 South by Southwest Gaming Awards, and the 13th British Academy Game Awards. His hit game, That Dragon Cancer, went viral. He's a regular speaker at TEDx, presenter all over the country. Please help me in welcoming Ryan Green.
Thanks all. I hope this is what you expected. Thank you so much for having me. Tonight, I have come to discuss longing. You know, the chasm between the way things are and the way things should be. Disappointment. Fathers who should have been able to control their rage. Mothers you wish you could trust with your heart. A God you thought would show up to rescue you from your pain, but didn't. Longing to be seen, to be understood, praised and told, well done. Longing to be the object of love rather than the object of wrath. To see justice, but to be let off the hook just once. To function like everyone else seems to function. To be normal like everyone else seems to be normal. To be filled with joy at the fact that you're actually adopted. And you belong to a tribe of weirdos that embrace you for who you are, even in the ways that you've tried hard not to be. You know, we are told in filmmaking to show, not tell. Filmmaking is a visual storytelling medium. In video games, we are to be and not just do. Because video games are a medium of habitation. Of course, what do I do is the very first questions players ask you when they sit down for a game. Video games are for shooters and jumpers and puzzlers and adventurers and sorters and collectors. You know, the world is continuously categorizing us into groups of who we are and who we're not so that they can sell us things. The taxonomies are made easier when the world can lop off the things that make us different, the things that don't quite fit in simple boxes. And for video games, these classifications can be artificially reductive. Video games are spoken in terms of features, benefits. They're good because they're useful. They improve hand-eye coordination. This one's so addictive, you're going to love it. This one has unbelievable graphics and gameplay, and it will improve your memory. We feel the need to justify the time that we spend playing them to ourselves and to others. You know, perhaps if you're sitting in this room this evening, you're used to defending your time spent playing video games in utilitarian terms to your parents and your professors or your pastors. Or if you're parents, you may be fighting with your kids about screen time in Fortnite. Not seeing any value in this screen time except for the valuable time that they're taking away from your children. I'm not here to sell you video games. The industry has done a tremendous job of squeezing video games into unnatural, profane, or lewd forms in an effort to feed them to all of us. Many games are pushed on me in the manner of street hustlers flicking pornographic tracks on the streets of Las Vegas. Hey man, you want to have some fun? You want to relieve some stress? You want to bump a pure dopamine off the glass of this mobile phone? I'm not here to save you through video games, delivered in a Christianized form, having crafted them into a new shape of a gospel tract. Oh, you thought this was a $100 bill? Well, let me tell you about true riches in Christ. You know, by the way, if you were to die tonight, do you know that you'd be burning in hell? Well, if you follow this little Roman road you see here in front of you, you can know for sure you'll be welcomed into heaven. I'm not here to defend video games. There's plenty of things that we're asked to do in video games that aren't healthy. Some are even downright reprehensible. I'm here to talk about longing. And tonight, I would like to posit to you that when we stop thinking of video games as a medium of only playing, and instead begin to think of them as a medium of being, we will start to see video games for what they are. They're places inhabited by broken image bearers who are longing for beauty, joy, passion, love, and yes, play. I learned a word from a friend recently. Maybe you can help me if I mispronounce this. But simulacrum? Those of you who are nearly over the hill, like me, and our friends a little bit older may resonate with the phrase in the good old days, or kids these days. It belies the impression that history was more ideal before this generation made it so strange, so broken, so fragile, so foreign, so full of victims, so lacking in personal responsibility when men were men and women were women, and hard work and modesty produced thriving families and communities. A simulacrum is a picture or representation of someone or something. Sometimes it takes the form of a nostalgia for a time that never existed. Usually these images are distorted, are the simulacrums we hold, simulacrums we hold in our minds, an accurate view of the world around us. I I read in Wikipedia, where I do all my philosophical research, that Plato spoke of two forms of image making, the precise replica and the one intentionally distorted to favor the viewer. Plato would tell a story of a cave. And the cave was inhabited by prisoners, and these prisoners, from birth until present, were locked up in chains facing the far wall. That was their known world. All they'd seen in their whole life was the far wall. And in that cave, behind the prisoners was a fire. And between the fire, well, that's the cave. Here's the people. And between the fire and the people walked forms. I don't know what those forms are, but what it did was it cast shadows of those forms on the wall. Plato said that the philosopher is free from such chains and comes to realize true reality is not those shadows that were cast on the wall, and the philosopher learns to describe the truer forms that are moving behind the prisoners. So, awesome. Further searches in Wikipedia uncovered a technique artists use called anamorphosis, which I think is really cool. So it's a sculpture that's been distorted to look correct in a steel cylinder. This is an image that will only look correct from a certain viewpoint. Sculptures like this, when observed from different perspectives, morph into completely different images. I learned from my friend that cultural simulacrums are formed to look like reality from a fixed cultural perspective. As I said before, simulacrums sometimes take the form of nostalgia from a time past that never existed. Maybe they take the form of longing for a suburban white picket fence without the substance abuse, or the expansion of the upper middle class without the poor it displaces. These images that we keep in our minds can shatter when the viewer takes a step to the political right or to the political left. And the shadows of reality this viewer believed to be accurate turn out to only be fragments of their imagination. See, I perceive that filmmakers and video game designers often serve as the philosophers of our own cultural caves. These philosophers broaden our views of reality through their work. And for that reason, it's our responsibility to broaden our own view and look beyond the shadows reality cast on the far wall of our own cultural caves in order to construct ever more accurate images about the nature of truth. Now, I personally tend to think that as a philosopher, my images are perfect, and the replicas are pristine, and basically how I see the world is how the things are. How all is the way all things are, and you'll soon see that they are not. And I'm not a trained philosopher, if you haven't noticed, because I'm doing my research on Wikipedia. My jaunt down this Wikipedia-fueled philosophical rabbit hole had to end so I could move on with writing this talk. But one more last thing I gleaned from this reading is that philosophers disagree on what our philosophical simulacrum making reveals about the nature of truth. Some believe our aim should be to form ever more precise replicas of the truth. Some believe the quest for ultimate truth is foolhardy. It's a foolish undertaking because there is no ultimate truth to be discovered. Instead, the only thing we're capable of discerning is the differences between our points of views. And regardless of what the truth of the matter is, I have come to find that when I'm too precious and hold too tightly to my image of what I hoped the world would look like, it has only served to become an idol, tarnishing my view of others and preventing me from painting better, more beautiful pictures of the God I long to reflect. And this is why I want to talk about longing. Some philosophers, like, say, C.S. Lewis, believed in the existence of ultimate forms, similar to what Plato envisioned. Lewis speaks of longing for these forms. He says that the myths we tell ourselves as humans are proof that the more real form of reality exists, the deeper magic of Aslan, of Narnia, a truth that is hidden and set to discover. He says, until we have faces, the sweetest thing in all my life has been the longing to reach the mountain, to find the place where all the beauty came from, my country, the place where I ought to have been born. Do you think it was all meant for, it has all meant nothing? All the longing for home? For indeed it now feels not like going, but like going back. Tonight I'm going to share my journey of longing with all of you. He says in Weight of Glory, in speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, which we find ourselves in even now, I feel a certain shyness. I'm almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to rip open the inconsolable secret at each one of you, the secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. I was once asked by a journalist why we included our faith in our game, That Dragon Cancer. And I replied, I would love to live in a world where magic is possible. A world where magic is possible. That's my far-off country. Now, it would be convenient to confess at this point that in my desire for this magical far-off country, that spawned a deep love for the worlds that video games and geek culture paint in our imaginations. Perhaps you think that maybe I grew up role-playing high fantasy, and LARPing, devouring Lord of the Rings books, and dealing Magic the Gathering decks at lunch tables. I did not. I was cautioned against magic and the occult from a very early young age. So, when I was growing up, in the decade that every geek loves to get nostalgic about, the 80s, the occult was a force to be reckoned with. Therefore, anything that looked or sounded like it was of the devil was strictly forbidden and not to be associated with, because it could establish gateways for the demonic, and demons could crawl through these instruments of the devil and oppress me. And I was not allowed to watch the Smurfs, or the Thundercats, Scooby-Doo. I know. Dungeons and Dragons was strictly forbidden. Yeah. And let's not even get started on Magic the Gathering. I recall I once foolishly, in my own little bit of rebellion, agreed to play the game with my friends. And I tried to honor my upbringing by saying I would play, but not the black deck. And my mother got wind of my small rebellion, and all I recall is being pulled out by my ear by my mother. My only dalliances in trying to harness the dark arts came in the form of using the Force like a Jedi. Confession time, anybody? Or in my day, trying to move things with my eyes like Matilda. I do not admire the occult. I do not struggle with being romanced by witchcraft. I have faithfully shunned Harry Potter into adulthood, and I have a general disdain for anything Halloween or horror related. It's true. Because I was raised to wield the power of the Holy Spirit. And with the name of Jesus, bind every devil that wielded its ugly head. I had books like Piercing the Darkness and This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti. My superheroes, special powers, were heroes of the faith. So, no, I do not practice magic, but I longed for a world where Jesus and his Spirit could bind up and cast down the devil, where I could speak in angelic tongues, lay hands on the sick and have them recover, and possess the ability to exorcise and cast out any evil spirit that came my way. And so in the age of peak youth group ministry, the late 90s, I am so sorry you all missed this, because it was glorious. I was in line every time to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Because if I received it, I was so sure that strange tongues were going to pour from my mouth in all of its undecipherable linguistic holy glory. And we hung breathlessly to stories of angelic visitation or demonic manifestation or miraculous faith healings and resurrections. We were on the right side, after all. So if we were given the chance to flex our spiritual gifts, the spectacle of God would be undeniable. I married a girl from Tulsa, Oklahoma. She loved Jesus and she loved theater. And she was raised in the world of word of faith preachers like Hagin and Copeland. And we helped plant a church that proclaimed the full gospel of spiritual gifts. Baptism of the Holy Spirit, divine healing. These are all the normal instances of the normal Christian life. So is it any wonder that when our third son, Joel, turned 1 and we found out that he had a large tumor in his head, that it was our inclination that God had chosen us to make a spectacle of his power in our lives? I want to believe in a world where magic is possible. I want to believe in a world where children don't die from tumors because our God, who is able to spin galaxies into existence with his words, is able to grant us that small mercy. C.S. Lewis continues, "The secret also which pierces with such sweetness that when in very intimate conversation the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward. We affect to laugh at ourselves like I'm doing. The secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though it is our desire to do both." I'm not ashamed to admit that I believe that God heals. I still do. I speak in tongues. But I would be lying to say that it doesn't embarrass me, that it doesn't anger me, that it didn't devastate me, that God didn't do what I pleaded so desperately for him to do. Joel died. And I was building a simulacrum of the world in which he didn't have to die. I was so sure of this virtual world I was building and how it would show the real world, the pain that we had endured, and I would confess all the doubts I carried. But, just like Elijah, he poured bucket after bucket of water on the altar in the presence of those occultic prophets of Baal. My God wouldn't be sleeping. My God wouldn't make me cut my wrists and cry out in incoherent pagan missives for fire to fall. My God would instead send healing. And he would send fire in the presence of the world's video cameras. And I would have my world where magic was more than possible. I could wield it. At this point, you're probably wondering what on earth I'm talking about. I was brought here to discuss video games, after all. But I need you to know that we fully expected for our son Joel to live. We believe that he would be rescued from this terrible disease, one that will surely consume all of us if we live long enough. And that we intended to document every moment in every medium that we knew how. Lewis continues. Can you tell we love Lewis in our household? These things, the beauty and the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshipers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only a scent of a flower that we have not yet found, the echo of a tune we have not yet heard, and from a country we have not yet visited.
What does Joel love? Wawa. In cups, bathtubs, and the warm, wet tongues and the cool fur of Das. And maybe the sweet mois of daily affection.
Do you know how they celebrate off-treatment day, like when kids are done with their treatments? I guess maybe you don't because you're not in the clinic as much as I am, but on someone's last day, they always bring them a cake and they sing Happy Off Therapy Day to you.
I'm sorry, guys. It's not good.
Basically, he thinks we should move forward with the radiation, and it kind of freaks me out, but it could be another miracle.
There's a story in the Bible where Jesus and his disciples are on a boat. And a furious storm hits the sea, and everyone thinks they're gonna die. And where do you think Jesus is? He's asleep in the back of the boat. Bouncing around. Do you like that? Oh, I love your giggle.
Before we move on to discuss the design of our game, That Dragon Cancer, and the details of its creation, I want to take a moment for you to reflect on what I've shared with you so far. To meditate on the statement, video games are far off countries. What if video games weren't defined by categorizing their mechanics or their useful content? Let's lay down core game loops and technical art pipelines, the best game engine choice, the most elegant programming design patterns. Let's even lay down storytelling for a minute. If you'll indulge me, maybe even close your eyes. I want you to hold in your mind an image of true beauty. What is that thing you long for, that you hold on to by faith, or a capital T truth that you aspire to reveal? Perhaps it's something you desire. As Lewis says, it's the secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we long to do both. So perhaps this longing is for true love. Perhaps it's a longing to reveal true intimacy with God our Father. Perhaps it's the healing of a loved one, or even ourselves. Perhaps it's a revelation of true worth, Maybe it's just the validation of your own worth. Perhaps it is faith without doubt. Or maybe it's a solution to your own doubts. Perhaps you would like someone to know what it is like to be known for once, or for somebody to truly know you and accept you and love you anyway, or grant you forgiveness, or gift you acceptance. So take a full minute. Imagine your far off country. Now imagine you were able to create a world and you were able to place that desire inside of it. What's the first thing you'd build? Who would you invite into this world? What would you talk about? How would you spend your time? Okay, open your eyes. Let's move on with this profound quote from Derek Yu that I found on my timeline. I think video games are inherently absurd, but it's a strength of the medium. As a designer, it's the ultimate freedom of knowing your audience will quickly accept that eating a cooked turkey off the sidewalk will heal a grievous wound. They accept it because they see it's true. This is Joel. Joel was diagnosed with a rare brain cancer called ATRT, atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumor, only a few weeks after he turned 1. He had been vomiting for weeks, but we initially chalked it up to a stomach bug. And Joel didn't want to eat any cake on his first birthday. He was a very sad sock monkey. We grew increasingly worried about him in the weeks that followed. And we became concerned that he had gotten dehydrated. And so we checked him into the same local hospital where he had been born for some tests. And the blood work and the swallow studies, they had returned nothing. Even after they recommended an MRI, our biggest concern was the anesthesia they were going to give him. The weeks that followed were a blur. Joel was airlifted to the Children's Hospital in Denver. The associate pastor of our church was the first one to show up at the hospital. And my pastor of my childhood and most all of my adult life, he drove us down to Denver, and as we rode along the way in shock. Intensive care is a fishbowl, and we were on display, which is okay for us because we were used to performing. Amy and I met in high school. Amy's my wife, by the way, at auditions for the fall play, The Importance of Being Earnest. And we played love interests, me, the cocky and crafty bachelor, her, the young and beautiful ingenue, and then she, the strident princess in Antigone, and me, the faithfully and overly emotive and way too long of hair, overly emotional prince. It seemed we were destined to be together on stage and on the covers of our local newspaper. twice, looking longingly into each other's eyes. Our interest in broadcast journalism, theater, video production, filmmaking, and creativity of all kinds flowed from that initial creative and romantic sparks from high school. And so after we married, when we were both 21, we decided to start a video production business. We acquired 2 state-of-the-art Canon XL1S cameras, as pictured here. Look how beautiful it was. 480p. We shot our films at church. We tried filming weddings. We weren't very good at it. We dabbled in corporate videos. These are some screenshots from our amazing sermon illustration videos. I had learned to program in high school, and I got caught up in the wave of web design and the internet boom. And so I skipped college, and Amy went and got a degree in technical journalism. And we started a family. All the creativity we planted in our youth and nurtured in our 20s burst forth following Joel's diagnosis. Amy wrote faithfully about Joel's treatment, our spiritual journey, the assurance of our hope, and our faith for the miraculous in the blog we set up, and I made art. It was stark and beautiful. And I made sure to include Bible verses in the margins of the compositions. My declarations were bold. And we were prepared to fight this cancer with our swords of faith. Joel's treatment included the veritable kitchen sink, but after nearly a year of treatment, Joel's tumor came back. We found out that Joel would die soon. But Joel didn't die. His tumor responded to palliative treatment, and he was tumor-free for 6 wonderful months after his 2nd birthday. I remember Amy feeling excited at the time and eager expectation of the miraculous, because Joel's recovery felt miraculous. A devastating test result of Joel's spinal fluid had revealed clumps of cancer cells, and a few weeks later, those tests were clear. And our doctor was likely annoyed by our bold proclamations of the miraculous, but he got used to us. Because Joel's cancer confounded all of our expectations for several years. I've always wanted to be an artist. For most of my life, that either meant film or video games. The birth of the iPhone App Store in 2008, only months before Joel was born, had awakened that interest once again. And I had been dabbling in Flash games, but for the first time, a path forward as an indie game developer looked clear. And I had to seize the moment. And so Amy agreed to let me buy a MacBook Pro and graciously encouraged me to take a long weekend to build something. And it may have sounded a little bit more like, I'm tired of your moaning, just do something. And I did. And I made 4 small physics toys for children. They're beautiful. Basic basketball game, marbles, snowman, piñata, and they all sold for $1 a piece, except for basketball. That was a $2 game. And that was thanks to my wife's sage advice, because I would have just put them all in one game and sold them for $1. So, but I was able to pay back our computer. After Joel's birth, Amy had been dabbling in stand-up comedy, Christian stand-up comedy to be precise. And she had a gig on my birthday. And we were going to spend my birthday at a music festival. And so since she was so moved that I was willing to spend my birthday promoting her comedy at a music festival instead of actually listening to music, she had a birthday gift to me. She reached out to a successful Christian game designer who seemed to care about the good, the true, and the beautiful. And she introduced us via email, introducing them to her aspiring husband. And I breathlessly ranted in my emails back to him, opining about good art and how I was ready to become one of the best. So, I said things like, I see no more powerful weapon than rhetoric. I want in on the fight. I don't think I knew what I was asking. I was further moved. This is an email. I am being very transparent with you here. I said, it's refreshing to see Christians in the creative marketplace creating good art, not just explicit bad art. Not that there's anything wrong with explicit bad art if the Spirit's in it. And everyone makes some explicitly bad art before they make good art. That's how we learn. And he replied, man, I have to disagree. Specifically, I think that beauty is one of the highest revelations of God. And if Christians create art that is objectively bad, then it creates a rather bad impression of God that tends to reinforce an image of him that, I think this is key, is all rules and regs, but no joy and no passion. And so I worked for him. And I moonlighted. I moonlighted for him, and I worked at my healthcare job during the day. And I was building up my skills as a designer and a programmer and a technical artist. And the year after Joel's terminal prognosis, but his miraculous, we felt miraculous recovery, I made my first beautiful game. Well, I take it back. It wasn't really beautiful, but it changed the way I approached game design, and it introduced me to my future business partner, Josh. And we formed Numinous Games, and it's a studio that we formed in 2012. In the video game industry, we hold events similar to 48-hour film festivals, and we call them game jams. And you have 48 hours to build a game from scratch with a small team, and it's or on your own, and it's usually based on a theme. And the end of a 2-day crunch, you then come back together and you show people your work. So Josh had hosted something he called a meaningful gameplay game jam. And the idea here was that we were going to discover the vocabulary of meaningful mechanics. And so Amy suggested I create a wife simulator, like a Tamagotchi for your relationship. So I'm going to share this with you. All right, let's see if we can, hold on. This is where we get, oh no, come on. Oh, here we go. I dusted this off from I had to download Unity from 8 years ago. 2 days, people, 2 days. We have sound. Are you getting any sound back there? Let me make sure that it's set.
You're sending sound.
Oh no! Try sending sound again. Nothing?
Nope.
Okay.
I don't know if you need to target the decimator on that.
It's targeted. Let me try taking it out of play mode here. Okay. Live demos are awesome. I'm going to restart Unity and see what happens. Uh-oh. No! You had to hear that opening again. Can you guys all see? All right, you guys, anybody have Tamagotchis growing up? Anything? They've made a comeback, right? I didn't do the graphics on this one. I don't claim that. So, your gigawife has a love tank that is slowly depleting, and you must keep it full. Uh-oh, she's getting lonely. Here's a little message for you, dear. Poetry. Oh, yeah. Some jewels. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. We're in the bedroom here.
Oh.
Buy something nice, why don't you? But sometimes I come home and I'm impatient. Uh-oh, wait, we gotta go. Gotta chase her, because we're mad. There we go. Yep. How you doing? Because I said. Yelling. Gosh, what's gonna happen, you guys? Her love tank is empty. This is Amy's brilliant voice acting, by the way.
Oh.
Oh, that's confusing. Yikes.
Oh.
She's crying now. Oh no. Wait, let's go. Oh, there she is again. This is a wandering script that was very, very poor. I didn't. Oh. Dang. She looks the same. I have a type, so. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Put on the, should I resurrect it? Is it worthy? All right. Goodness. Okay. Oh man. So believe it or not, that's how I met my business partner. He had made some lame game about predestination and Molinism or something. But, so I knew I had met my match, right? So I must confess that when we started working on That Dragon Cancer, the following year, we were more concerned with the explicitness of our art than beauty. Or rather, I would say I was striving for beauty, because I was learning how to be a 3D modeler. Small steps. But I was okay. Joel was still thriving, and Amy enrolled him in preschool. And he loved his teachers. He learned to walk. His cancer continued to be held at bay with radiation and chemo treatment, and he had hearing aids, and we were learning sign language. Our faith tradition had conditioned us to believe that if we just held on to the very end, if we persevered in faith, that God would grant our bold declarations of healing, and the world will know that he was real and that he loves the strong in faith. It's biblical, right? If we were willing to show the bad with the good in the middle of Joel's story, well, then who would be able to deny that power of God in the midst of it? But Joel passed away in March of 2014 after a final recurrence that we could no longer treat. He lived 3 years longer than anybody expected. But God didn't respond in the way our image of him dictated he should. I mean, we had invited cameras to witness this great miracle. A documentary was being made about the production of the game, about Joel, about our family, and about his cancer, and about our faith and how our faith in God would do the miraculous. But they were there the night Joel died. They were filming a church-wide prayer meeting in our living room. So video games are far off countries, and when we play them, we accept an invitation to travel there with the designer and sometimes with other people. You know, in retrospect, it probably seems foolish to have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars building the sets and the props and the characters and the environments to tell the story of our son, which had not yet ended. I suppose if the ending were the important part of the story, it would have been foolish. But in the wake of Joel's death, our ability to have focused our creativity on Joel for the last 3 years seems to have been providential. You know, so often we want our stories to have happy endings. It's it's assuring to know that the good guys won and that the monsters were slain, and that there is something to be learned, though, about valuing the journey in the middle of the story, regardless of how it ends. Because, like conversations, right, they're good not because you know how they're going to end, but because by the end of the conversation, it reveals the character of the person that you're talking to, and you know them more intimately than you did before. And like if you're a kid and you're building a fort, it can be way more satisfying when you're forced to improvise rather than following the plans, right? And an adventure is epic when every new twist and turn is unexpected. You know, for us, our mountaintop last-minute rescue experience that we had longed for and wanted to orchestrate ended in tragedy. But our journey was meaningful because what remained was a great love. Our self-created simulacrums of God's greatest glory, being miraculous and that of signs and wonders, that image was starting to crack. And we have seen sweetness in love glimpsed in rest, in connecting with Joel, whether he was at home like this or in the hospital. Those are the moments I will treasure and long for my entire life. And we have seen the strength of love formed in our marriage as Amy and I wrestled with our own faith and the differences in our faith individually. And we've seen the endurance of a love built in teammates and filmmakers who documented our family. And they stayed in town after Joel passed away, and they cut together memorial videos for us of Joel as the devastation of his death swept over us. And that endurance was built when we were working long into the night ahead of another enthusiast gaming convention where we were delivering a new build the next day. And players would come and they would play our game and they would weep and they'd embrace us and they'd tell us their stories. And finally, we've seen evidence of the love in the industry, the general games industry, who after we ran out of money to finish building the game, they rised up and they funded our Kickstarter, knowing who we were and what we believed, and they still trusted us and they still accepted us. The journey was meaningful because there's beauty, because beauty in the midst of ashes is what we're all trying to create. And we didn't protect ourselves. We made ourselves vulnerable, and we disarmed ourselves. And we walked naked through a world that we had been brought up to believe hated us. and our faith. And what we discovered was love, and that has sustained us in the years since Joel's death. So, what do you do in that dragon cancer? I realize in all of this flowery prose that if you haven't experienced the sense of place, the presence and intimacy that can be found in video games, you may still have trouble grasping what I'm talking about. And so I wanted to share with you a few scenes from the game. The first will be a space filled with helplessness. The second, a space full of presence. And the third, a space where we ask you to do the opposite of doing. We ask you to let go. And after that, I'd like us to return to the spaces that you all built in your minds and reflect on that far-off country that you imagined. So first off, a space of helplessness. One of the first places we designed it in the game was based on a night I had spent with Joel in the hospital. Joel was sick and dehydrated, and I longed to comfort him, and I was beside myself, and he was beside himself, and he did not feel good, and he was vomiting, and every time I fed him juice, he would vomit, and he would scream if I wouldn't give him more juice, and it was awful. And all the tricks that a father forms for comforting their child went out the window. And in desperation, in a moment of desperation, I cried out in prayer. And I remember God just telling me to thank him for everything how he had brought us through thus far. And I remember I did start to thank. I did start to be grateful. And in that moment, I felt like one of the few moments in my life that I felt seen by God. Because Joel stopped hitting his head on the bars and screaming in agony, and he fell asleep. And later he was able to drink, and that moment of grace and that moment of providence I wanted to share with the world. And I had asked Amy, what would happen if you were playing a level in a video game and the level was broken? So no matter what you did, it didn't work. What would that feel like? So here are some very early concepts of the game. I'll be showing you concepts and various early art because video games are an iterative process. How many of you are familiar with Twine? A few people? Okay. So Twine is awesome. If you can use Word or a web editor, you can use Twine. And that would allow you to make interactive stories. And so I fired up Twine. Oops. And I started to write. Oops. Dehydration. Oops. Is this open? Oh, there it is. Okay. So I wrote interactive poetry. And I reflected on the space that I had built in the game and started to write poetry on the walls. And then I started to build, what are the verbs that I would do in that space? So I started to reflect, turn on the TV, walk around the room to calm him. Then what would happen? So then what resulted was a scene that we built in preparation. Let's try this. There we go.
It's okay, Jolie. Shh. greedily big, deep gulps. Okay, Jolie, that's enough. Breathe, kiddo. And he does. And I wipe his face of snot and tears and juice. And then he vomits, and I catch it. I always catch it. No! Don't hit your head on the bars, Joel. Joel! I know you're mad. Please stop. Please. Stop. I shake. I weep. I pray. I plead. I need peace. You are there. I want you here. I want you to call my son. And you've brought us this far. He's still here, not dead, not there, with you. God, I want him here with me. Please. Peace. He sleeps. Thank you.
It's important to me that you know that those aren't his cries in the game. I don't know why it matters to me, but it does. But we did put his laugh in the game. In the weeks after Joel's death, the details of Joel's journey seemed to pale in the face of Joel's absence. We really just wanted to be with him. And so this is a map of all the different spaces that we had designed, and we started to cull them for Joel's presence. This space right here we called the park at the edge of the world. And it was filled with fragments from his life, echoes of him from our home videos, little games he used to play with us, parts of play sets that he'd played on in different places, moments of joy. And we folded them into this magical space that was frozen in time, and yet it was containing all time. And what resulted was this space. This might take me a moment to pull up. Here we go. Controls in this game are very simple. It's just a mouse or a touchpad. On the iPhone or the iPad, it's just a single finger. It's been frustrating to some people, but it's also was decided so that more people could play, so they wouldn't have to understand what it was like to free look and walk with two joysticks. So I'm going to jump to the second scene.
What does Joel love? Wawa. In cups, bathtubs, and the warm, wet tongues and the cool fur of dogs. And giving a sweet was daily affection. And bye-byes. And blown kisses. And more. Oh, always more. This full list of words. So few words.
None of them know. No one ever realizes how short the time is.
What is pain without a word for it? What is hope without a word for it? Who is God? What is joy? Who am I to him? Dada.
Play a form of Ready, Set, Go.
Okay, Joel. Ready? Set. Go. Are you ready? Set. Go. Ready?
Who's that? Let's tell him, Caleb, that Joel's doing really well. Yeah. He's been very peaceful all afternoon.
Giving Joel a kiss. Okay, Joel.
Give him a kiss.
Ready? Set. Go.
Can you give Zoe a kiss? This is a video of our son Elijah kissing Amy's belly when she was pregnant with Zoe near the end of Joel's life.
Now give Joel a kiss.
Ready?
Do it again. Big kiss.
Giving Joel a kiss.
Give him a kiss. And what's this over here? Can you give Zoe a kiss? The phone that's almost dead.
Hey babe, just got done at the doctor. Now they think that maybe he's throwing up all the time because he has acid reflux. So they gave me a medication and we can give it to Joel, and they said we have to give it at least 3 full days, but that if he's still throwing up after that, then we can come back. And I mentioned the head tilt thing again, even though they keep saying it's not related, but you always have to mention that one weird outlying thing. So I told them how his head was tilted to the right, but they still say that that's probably not related at all. So I guess we'll just give this a try, and I don't know, I'll tell you more about it when you get home.
Something Amy would have sent, but it was something we wrote for the game.
Fear is cancer's preservative, cancer's embalming oil. And you, O accuser, are fear's oil salesman. You're a snake, a serpent, a dragon with snuffed out coal on his breath, molting, talons broken from the struggle to free yourself of your own skin.
The last thing I'm going to share with you is the second to last scene in the game. We call it the Temple of God. And it took a long time to get right. We knew we wanted a space where the player would experience our goodbyes to Joel. It was the pinnacle of metaphor for me as a 3D environment artist. I conceived of this temple of God not built by human hands, but it would reside in the body. And so I was looking for organic shapes inspired by cathedrals from around the world. I don't have a high church background, but I was very taken by the sacredness of cathedrals and the spaces that they create. And inside that cathedral, this is kind of a metaphor for like the ribs of the body inspired by a Japanese space. It would be marred by all the stuff of religion that we place inside our churches and inside ourselves to please God, or to move God, or to put Him on display. This is an early prototype on the top right there where I thought, well, what if we just give them a bunch of levers to pull? And they just keep pulling the levers, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to pull the levers. Or maybe on the bottom left here, this was kind of a larger-than-life version of his feeding tube. So that's maybe you would press the buttons at the right time, at the right pressure to feed him. But then we started to feel like, well, if we let the player do that, they might feel like they could harm Joel. And we didn't want them to feel that way, because this wasn't about mastery. It was about acceptance. Or even the images we started to put in here. They just didn't seem to feel right. And so we started to strip away everything that we had put in there. Here's one more. Oh, yeah, that's it. And so what resulted is the next scene. Joel up ahead of us. In the previous scene, we've been chasing a dove through the aftermath of a storm on a sea. And here we find Joel.
All right, kids, you know what time it is.
Joel really loves Barney. choices in life. The temple is still in construction, still under construction. This is where it starts to get complicated. Because what you're about to hear are the prayers that were prayed on the night of Joel's death. And at the time, they are full of faith and expectation. And you see these Megatrons. Any good church has Megatrons, right? Because you got to put it on display. This is a mix of actual prayers and recorded things we did for the game.
Lord, rise up. My God, come save me. I will not let you go unless you bless him. I will not let you go unless you bless him.
Lord, I pray right now that you would just, you would touch Joel right now. You created the cells, Lord. You created his body. You created everything that makes him up, Father. Father, you say in your word that you knew us before you formed us. You know the very number of hairs on our heads, Father. Father, you're our sky. The one that didn't just provide for us, the one that looked ahead of us and provided
Lord, I
for
want to
us.
see you. Dear Lord, I want to see you. Joel, I want to see you.
Right, because that is the nature of who you are. That is the nature.
Father, I pray that you bless them mightily. I pray that you bless them in their finances, you bless them in their health, and you bless their children, Father. Father, I pray that they would
I will not let you go unless you bless him. God, come save him. Lord, rise up. My God, come save him.
Long time. In fact, can even hold on a little bit longer.
Lord, I pray that you see your glory power in Joel's back in his face and his cheeks. Lord, we pray for that. I pray that your glory come. Raise Joel. Lord, give him new life abundantly to run with his brothers here on this earth, in this place. Your will be done.
But eventually, even at prayer meetings, you got to get up.
Pray with all the strength, with all the faith that is in us, Lord. There is no time left for this child on this earth. And God, so we come to you, Lord, with faith of your children, with faith as small as mustard seed. And Lord, we speak in the name of Jesus. Oh my God, let this child's soul come back to you.
He was not in the wind. He was not in the earthquake. He was not in the fire. He was here in a gentle whisper.
Our game ends where it began, in the park at the edge of the world, with the things Joel loved: bubbles, puppies, pancakes. It's a space that is difficult for me to return to. It's a place where we imagined Joel whole and happy, a place we longed to visit but couldn't. And Joel never had more than a handful of words. I longed to talk to him, and I never could. And when we designed this space, we put a Joel in who we had never met. Joel the way he should be, the way we longed for him to be. And the first time I heard our fourth son, Elijah's voice playing in the editor as the voice of Joel, I burst into tears. If you share our faith, or even if you don't, you may still recognize the longing that I felt. The longing to be with a love that you've lost. To be present in our bodies together, and not just in spirit. And to discover that at the end of our days, our family, our Savior, and our God will be waiting on that distant shore. Because I believe, or I agree with Lewis and Plato in my limited understanding, that we are only able to perceive shadows on a cave cast by a more real form. But I believe that the truer form exists, and that my son is there with it. And one day, I hope to hold his truer self on my lap, if he's not too big. So, I want you to close your eyes again. That's okay. And I want to encourage you. If you're interested in creating for this medium of place, of presence, of being, that you build spaces where longing meets love. Make spaces that are worthy of the player's presence. Because the truth is, those spaces will be just as real to your visitors as that dream that they had last night of a lost loved one, or the memory of the victories on the playgrounds of childhood glory. So in your own far-off country, who would you invite into that space? What do you want them to know about you? What do you want them to share with you? And what great truth, what great revelation will they discover without your help? Okay, you can open your eyes. Our video game was a world that we built around the shadow of a dragon. And in it, I placed the echo of my son, a son who I love, and I asked you to love him and let that love change you. And my hope is that it could be a simulacrum of hope in the shadow of death. And in that space, the Spirit of God would meet you and bring you comfort. Because I was wrong to see my faith as a sword, to wield and to cut down any semblance of doubt so that the world might know a deeper magic exists to save us. Because now I see faith as a shield. And it covers us when we are wounded, disappointed, and lonely. And that what remains in the presence of that shattered hope, disappointment, is a faith that cradles us. And there is love. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that very moving presentation of a very moving game. I have to confess, I just played the game today for the first time. I've been meaning to for a while, but I actually avoided it because it was like, this difficult subject matter, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to enter into that. But then I figured, well, I'm going to meet you. I got to enter into that. So, yeah, and it was worth it. I mean, it was hard, but it was good, and so thank you.
Thank you.
So one thing your game did really well was communicating emotion, and I think that's what made it so powerful. So I wanted to ask, I know there's just a lot of natural emotion in the story, just the real life story, but what additional things did you do to build that emotion and have those emotional moments happen and affect the player in the way that they do?
Yeah. I've had people ask me before to pick my brain, right? It's a thing that happens. And they asked me once, like, hey, I have this game, and it's going to be post-apocalyptic, and there's going to be one character with cancer and another with depression. And so I wanted to talk to you about cancer because I wanted to have real emotion in it. And I said, do you have any experience with cancer? He's like, no. And I said, well, why are you wanting to write about cancer? And so I think that we have plenty of our own stuff that we're dealing with, right? To like go chase other things. And things that seem simple to us things that seem, I like to say, things that seem like water to us are wine to other people. And so I think there are things that are not obvious when you think about cancer. You don't think, for one, from the outside looking in, that there's a lot of dark humor to it, right? Like people in the hospital, they're constantly dealing with this on a regular basis, and they have to cope. And so you might insert jokes when jokes are inappropriate, but that's real. And anybody that has experienced that will see that image and know that it's true. So I don't think you have to manufacture it. I mean, I think obviously there are ways to do things. I think one thing that really helped us establish place was mining from our home videos. And so like throughout the game, and I tried to point it out a few times, we would have audio from our home videos mixed with dramatic audio that we wrote and performed. So there's a point in which Joel's feeding ducks and you're handing him bread to feed the ducks. Well, that whole experience was recorded after he died, but we inserted his laughter into it. And so we got to construct a moment that was true, but even if it wasn't like factual, like it didn't, represent one time. It was a conglomeration of lots of times. And so that's one way to build up the texturing of the narrative. Also, like, we had a composer and sound designer who was involved from the very beginning. He was, in fact, I met him in a coffee shop, and while we were making the first scene, and he's like, I can't get this out of my head, can I work with you? And if you know composers, like there's always composers that want to write stuff. It just so happened he happened to be a world-class composer and sound designer and programmer living in Loveland, Colorado. So, like, it felt just kind of providential, right? But that's one thing where meeting people at game jams and expanding your network of people allows you to introduce you to people that will surprise you. And he crafted an original soundtrack. He brought in quartets. He scored it. He mixed it. He designed it. And a lot, just like in indie films, sound matters more than picture. Sound matters more than picture in video games as well. And he added a lushness to our environments that wasn't there.
That's awesome. Thank you. So, got to ask the question. So, this is an interactive medium, video games, which you know really well. Why did you feel it was important to choose games and interactivity? I mean, there's always that question, like, why not just make a film or something like that?
We did.
You did. You also, yeah.
We made a film. We made a children's book. We made art and poetry, and like when you're a creative person, you just want to create, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so, like, if it's not a game, don't make it a game. But if it is a game, it should be a game. And I think a lot of times we think. I think after we released, we had somebody from Hollywood say, hey, you considered optioning the rights to the film? Why would we make a film? We made a game. And it was just like that misunderstanding. So I would just encourage you to think, to broaden your context and vocabulary for storytelling. You know, if it's something that maybe you want the player to stay in one place as long as they want to be. You know, in film, you control the pacing and you control the camera. In video games, you release both. And now you have to nudge. You have to, it's like theater. You have sound cues and light cues, and you have to guide them. You have to invite them. And you can't control them, because as soon as you control them, then they're not there as your guests. They're there as your robots. So that challenge has been very difficult, right? Like when to let go, when to hold on, when to move their face, you know, and you can't do that in VR. So VR even takes it to another level, where now you can't even control their head at all. You know, you can't take control and turn their head. So it's a different pace of storytelling. It's a different type of storytelling. And so I think you should lean into the strengths of what each one does well when you're wanting to tell your story.
That makes sense. Awesome. Let me see if there's any, I don't see any questions on here. Is it the farewell sheet, or is it a different one? It is? Okay. Text your questions, guys. We'd love to know what you guys want to know about this. Some just appeared. Wow, that was amazing. Let's see. Well, that's an interesting. What was your greatest fear in making this?
Well, I mean, who wants to hear a story of a miracle that didn't happen? You know? And I think that afterwards there's a little bit of that reservation, like, hey, like, is it good to even do this? We're so used to, like, we're so trained so well to defend God for him. We don't really usually, like, allow him to defend himself, which he will if he's going to, but you know, if he's not going to, it's not on us to defend him for him, you know? So I think there's a spiritual transition for us of like, that I don't have to defend God, you know? I can take my anger and my frustration and my doubts to him. And hopefully he'll hide treasures to find, because that seems to be the way he does things. He doesn't tell you all at once or when you want it, but just being open to it. So yeah, my fear was that. My fear was doing anything stupid online that would torpedo the project. And as you know, if any of you are in the game space, it can be a very, very explosive culture that can just teeter, you know, either way. And it's used to being in like cultural battles. It's a place of cultural warfare a lot of times. And it's not just because you're playing shooting games, but it's also because of identity and of politics and of just the need to be loved, you know? And I think that can create some really explosive moments. So we wanted to walk that line of like, you know, I am not, you know, I read Culture Care this last weekend. I was like blown away by it. If you haven't started reading your assignment or something, do. It's really good. But he talks about like the artists, let's not let our art be used as weapons in a culture of war, right? Like we need to care for the culture, and therefore our art should care for them as well. And I find that to be a much more productive way to use our art than as some piece of propaganda or some piece of gotcha media that like just serves to just divide us. And so we found that people from every stripe, every identity, every religion, every, you know, whatever, supported our game, and they supported it financially. Like there are people that gave us thousands of dollars that don't share our faith. So that's weird to me. Like that blew my mind. So I just believe we need to take, as artists, I think we can be more constructive right now in this time to be peacemakers.
Thank you. Let's see. I know. Well, here I'm going to combine this question with kind of one that I was thinking of too. So, I know you said you didn't play many games growing up because of your parents' influence, or at least not officially.
Sure.
But I was noticing just something of the style. It reminded me a little bit of some of the older like hypercard, hypertext kind of games from the 90s. And that's not a knock because I love those games.
I mean, I remember building hypercard stuff. Yeah.
So combining that with the audience question, what are some of your favorite games and which ones did you draw inspiration from?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I drew inspiration from Tetris and Mario. Maybe a little dash of Zelda. No, I don't. I don't know. I drew most of my inspiration from films and television. That's my medium of choice. That's the thing I enjoy. But what I found was a home in interactive, because like I said, you can inhabit the space that you paint, right? And so that changes the contract with the user. There are some modern games that I'm really taken by. There's, if you haven't gotten Apple Arcade, it's worth subscribing, I think. I downloaded Mosaic the other day, and I felt like they did a lot of things better than us, and I'm learning from. And they mixed mechanics and walking sim, and just the visual storytelling is phenomenal. And lots of layers, lots of visual layers, lots of beautiful compositions and camera positions, and a real feeling of awe. So so Mosaic was one. I love Beginner's Guide and Stanley Parable. That to me was like the theater of storytelling. There's a local dev here, Tender Claws. If you haven't heard of them, they made a game in VR called Virtual Reality, which is pretty fantastic and funny. But they also have a lesser known game called Pry on iOS. And Pry does some amazing things with mechanics as metaphor. And so things with pinch and zoom that you just feel like, wow, that's really effective. And
The eye-opening game?
Yeah, eye-opening, you blink. But you also do other things like different actions that kind of unlock the narrative in really unconventional ways. And it's a mix of like graphic design, interactive mechanics, and film. And so to me, it was a perfect hybrid that really worked as an app or a game better than it would have as a film or a game by itself. So those are some highlights for me.
Awesome. Let's see.
And of course, Gone Home.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. And what I've seen so far of Edith Finch is amazing. So there's also Edith Finch.
My students have seen that. I show that in multiple classes.
Yeah.
And
Journey, of course. You gotta say Journey.
Yeah.
Journey is that's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, this question was also my question. How has this game allowed you to process death and suffering? I'm sure you're still processing it even 5 years on, but
people would always ask me how are you able to do this? And we worked on it for 3 years, from end of 2012 to 2016 when we released it, to October 2016 when we did the mobile. So that period of 3.5 years, that's all I did full time, because we had raised funds, and we were able to make it somehow. And so while I was in the middle of it, it was the only thing I could do in the shadow of Joel's illness. That was, like I said before, I kind of perform, right? And so that's just how we expressed everything. We would make it our job to document his life, to be journalists of his life, to make art, and to be kind of consumed by that. And it was the thing I could talk about and be constructive about and not check out. And I think if any of your fathers, maybe you relate to me, sometimes it's just nicer to check out. And that just couldn't happen. So I feel in that way, the game was a lifeline. It was like Providence. When I say it was Providence, it allowed me to function. We are now 4 years out from release, and it is, those levels I play, I haven't played those for years. It is really hard to go back to them. And so I think we get people that tell us hey, I bought your game a couple years ago, but I didn't want to play it until I had kids. Now I just played it. and I'll remember it forever. And it's like really meaningful to me because a lot of times people are just like, I'll meet them and they're like, yeah, I haven't played it yet. And I'm like, that's okay. Like for every time, for every season, you know, there's a however the quote goes, you know. So yeah, I think that there was a time that it was life to me. There is a time right now as I'm processing my anger and grief and shaking my fists a little bit more, it's harder. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I think it's just like with any art, like it changes in context over time. And so it's way harder now than it was then.
Makes sense. If you don't mind a follow-up to that, you know, after playing the game, like, yeah, I was really moved, and I was like, I don't know, crying in the shower, and I'll admit that. You know, and I was like,
it's a good place to cry.
Yeah, it really is, and it's water anyway, right? Yeah. So
nobody knows.
That's right. I was praying. I'm like, God, why didn't you save Joel? Come on, like, and I'm sure you've asked that. Like, how do we answer that as Christians? I mean, we want that happy ending, and yeah. And I know you've kind of answered that, but I'm still just like, maybe you don't have an answer, but it's.
I do not know.
No.
It just doesn't make sense, but
yeah.
You know, I've heard people say, like, you know, when people are dying, they become very profound. And I remember one sweet woman that passed away. She said that God wields all things. She said it a couple times. And then she said wields all things, and that her definition of good is changing. Mm. And I think it necessarily has to, you know? I think it's a really unfortunate question we have to ask philosophically of how can a good God allow this stuff, but I think either our view of God has to change of who he is, or, you know, we have to change of what good is. Mm-hmm. And like there's entire philosophical thought, so branches of philosophical thought to answer that. Somebody said something to me today, actually, that, because I've been raging, it's really hard to pray when you're grieving. I don't know if you've experienced that, but it's really hard for me to pray when I'm grieving and angry. And I've been asking, why pain? This seems so silly. What a ridiculous theatrical thing that you allow us to go through. Like, what is the point? And somebody said to me, he said, he's a Catholic, and he was telling me about this order of Mount Carmel, which I believe is where Elijah had his...
Oh, Mount Carmel, yeah.
Carmel, yeah. Where like he had his big showdown, right? I believe, if I'm correct. Anyway.
I think so.
Anyway, they were talking about pain and how like pain isn't a gift to me, it's a gift to you. And I was like, okay. Like the ways in which I'm changed by pain produce, in suffering and perseverance, produce all the fruits of the Spirit. And those fruits of the Spirit become gifts to other people. And I'm like, well, that sucks. Because I didn't want to give gifts to other people. I'd much prefer to keep these gifts to myself. That was helpful to me today. But I don't have a long-term answer. It's a day-by-day thing.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you. Let's see. Well, that's interesting. How do you think streaming media like Twitch, Mixer, YouTube will affect game design?
Well, if you want my thoughts 3.5 years ago, you're welcome to read them on the website. I'm less angry now. It was tough because, you know, like, I think in some ways it's hindered the, streaming, I think right now, has hindered the innovation of narrative games. And the reason and in other areas, it's like totally saved certain contingents of the industry. So like, I'm not a never streamer, right? Like, I think streaming is productive, and it's been amazing to see, for one, people who are afraid to play our game were willing to watch it. Like even my mom didn't play the game, she watched Markiplier play the game. And I was taken aback by that at first, but I was like, that makes sense. Like, this is really hard on her, and I don't often think about that. Like, I just think about me, and how hard it is on me. So I think streaming offers a community. And when you look at like Jacksepticeye's, like there's like 4 million views, but when you look at how many comments are on that video, there's like over 100,000 comments. And it's people just like sharing hearts, you know? So it's like, that's beautiful. Like that's a gift to me, you know? Like that people are willing to engage in that way. So on the one hand, streaming is great because we reached 30 million people or however many million people we wouldn't have reached otherwise. It's also difficult because anybody watching a stream isn't typically buying the game usually, and so like it hinders our ability to get funding for future games. So it's harder to make things, and then there's also this industry driver of time length, of content length, because gamers measure value a lot of times based on gameplay length, and they measure their money spent versus how much time they got out of it, and it needs to be a good ratio, right? And so narrative experiences that are less than the length of a movie but cost like $5 or more are probably not going to be bought because, you know, and so like a value proposition. So I think there's a lot of competing things that are happening. I'm grateful to see things like Apple Arcade pop up, even though I really don't want subscription services, honestly, as an indie dev, because I'm like, well, for the last ones that can sell copies of our games. But it's going to change. And so, like, I think there are some ways that maybe subscription services could actually help narrative games, because you could subscribe to narrative games, you watch narrative games and all that stuff, but at least it would provide like a stream of viewers that want to engage with it. But more broadly, I think the things to be aware of in narrative design is that, you know, a narrative that is linear can be effective in video games. Sometimes maybe it should be a film and maybe it shouldn't be. That's up to whatever the thing is, right? But you have to consider that. Like, if everybody that plays your game is going to get the same experience, why shouldn't it be a film? You know? But if people are going to get different experiences, then you're going to add value. And even if people stream it, they're going to stream different experiences. And so, like, I think that's one thing to be mindful of. And I think we can do a better job as designers, like, collaborating with streamers and embracing streamers and embracing their audiences and being generous with them. I think the thing I'm learning from Culture Care is be generous. Put yourself in a position to be generous. And as generous as we felt, we didn't put ourselves in a position to be generous financially without Dragon Cancer. We put ourselves in a place where we needed to get at least some sales so that we could keep going. You know, like we were looking for work. But yeah, so I hope that it's a long answer, but it's a really complicated subject, I think.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Well, what's next? I mean, not that you need to top this because this is a work of art, but you know, what's your next? I guess what are you working on now, and what's your next baby, or do you have a no pun intended? That's probably the wrong.
No, that's fine. Like I think we're very interested in narrative in VR, which is tough because, like I said, you know, content length and stuff. But we have something that we're working on, and we're hoping to announce it early next year. And then we've also been doing some work in the adaptive space, like accessibility. So what are ways in which we can design for different input types that allow more people to come into gaming? So for example, there are very affordable eye tracking cameras now from Tobii that are like $160. That allows you to do eye tracking in your game. The thing about eye tracking though is that your input is different. Like your eye gaze is not steady, it has noise in it. You move your eyes quick, you know, it changes the control scheme. So you really have to work, you can't just like slap eye tracking onto a game and expect it to be good, right? Like you kind of have to design from the ground up with that stuff in mind. So there are accessible switches like the Microsoft Adaptive Controller that's really amazing and affordable. And honestly, guys, like the disabled gaming audience is really underserved, and we as the church can be an instrument of love in that space and generosity in that space. We can put our best work into that space, and really just like innovate and be compassionate and like make beautiful stuff that everybody can play. Because just because it's just one switch doesn't mean it can't be challenging, doesn't mean it can't be fun, doesn't mean it can't be engaging. But by designing for a single switch, like you're showing love to a broader amount of people. So that's something that we're really interested in and we really want to nurture, and we're trying to get funding for some stuff, and like that's something that we would really love to happen in the next year.
That's great. What advice can you give to, I'm sure we might have some working game designers in the audience, but I think we probably also have a lot of aspiring game designers. What advice can you give them as far as doing what you do?
Make friends with people that aren't like you. And honor the contributions of people who aren't programmers, and you will get better work. And you will build long-lasting relationships. I think I was reading, in this talk I was going many different directions, but I was reading a survey of the game industry and video game designers from the IGDA, and there's a report out there, you can look it up, and it's 80% white male. 80% white male programmers. What kind of stuff are you going to get from them? I think we know what we're going to get, and we see it all through the industry, right? But half of gamers are women, and 20% of gamers have part of the LGBTQIA community, and there are ways that we can love all types of gamers, but in order to love people, we have to see them. In order to see them, we have to know them, and knowing them requires that, that we love them and spend time with them. So I think the church, and I say the church here, capital C church, in our culture can do a better job loving the culture. And I think if we do that, we're going to make really beautiful work, and we're going to be known for our generosity, not for our weapons. You know what I mean?
That was great. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause for Ryan for flying out and hanging out with us, and for Michael, Professor of Game Design, for leading the Q&A. If this is of interest to you, if talking about telling stories that matter through game design is something that you're passionate about, we'd love for you to join us. Check us out at biola.edu/film. You can read all about our game design program. You can apply for our game design program right now. Up through February 1st is our final deadline. We'd love to answer any questions you have about that. Our game design lab coming next year. A big announcement in a couple weeks about our game design program. So thanks everyone for joining us and hanging out with us. Thanks again to Ryan. He's going to be wherever he went. Okay, there he is. Ryan's going to stick around. We had a ton of great questions come in that we just didn't have the time to get to. And so Ryan's going to stick around, chat with you guys. But that'll do it for this evening. Thanks so much for hanging out with us.